Good evening, Lake Washington School District staff, families, and community members. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to come and hear information about this critically important decision that we made regarding the 2021 school year. This is an extremely important topic, and we felt it was extremely important to share with you the rationale for why we decided to start in a fully remote setting for this school year. This was a difficult decision for us to make, and we made this decision based on a series of data recommendations that I want to walk through with you tonight. I know there's people in the community that do not agree with this decision, and I respect that because there's many different ways to look at this issue, and that is why we spent the amount of time we did to analyze this situation. I hope tonight's presentation provides context for you so you can understand why the decision was made and some of the things that we're going to do moving into the school year to assure that the educational experience for all 31,000 plus students in Lake Washington School District is of a high level and quality. And so with that, I want to recognize a few people that are with us tonight. Our entire cabinet is here with one exception tonight. And so I want to recognize Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden is here with us tonight, Associate Superintendent Barbara Posthumus, Associate Superintendent Matt Gillingham, Assistant Superintendent Dale Cody, Assistant Superintendent Joy Ross, Director of Communications Shannon Parthamer, and Assistant Superintendent Sally Askman was not able to be here tonight. I also want to recognize we have 4 of our school board members with us tonight. So I also want to recognize President Eric LaLiberty, Vice President Mark Stewart, Director Siri Bleasner, and Director Cassandra Sage. Thank you to all of those on our leadership team and our school board members for being here tonight as we share this information with the community. And so I'm going to pull up a presentation to walk through tonight because I really outlined a number of the different parts and pieces that we looked at as we made this determination. This should be a graphic that you potentially recognize because we have been working on the concept of returning to school for months already. As many of you know, in late June, or in early June, we started this planning, and we really had the intention of bringing students back for in-person instruction. At that point in time, it looked like the spread of the virus was such that we would be able to do that. And with that, I want to jump into the presentation. This is information that we have on our website, and it was interesting today to go back and read this because it really does outline the work that we've been doing over the last couple of months and what we will continue to do over the next 6 weeks in preparation for the start of school. But really, this whole planning was really around trying to understand the guidance from multiple agencies while we were also dealing with the spread of the virus and the pandemic, while making sure we had plans so that we could provide in-person instruction, but also be flexible if we needed to shift that. I can't stress enough that our goal is to have students receiving in-person instruction from their teachers. We know that that is the absolute best educational experience for students. That's where students learn their absolute best. And unfortunately, right now, we're going to have to pivot from that model to provide a different type of learning experience for students. But I can't stress enough that that is always our goal because our teachers want to be with their students and our students want to be with their teachers. I also want to ground us in what are we about as a school district. Our mission is about graduating each and every student that we serve. And that doesn't mean just some of them. That means absolutely every one of our students that come to us. It is our obligation to provide them with what they need so that they can graduate. And that really is a K-12 journey of providing supports and resources and experiences so students can graduate. But it's not just about graduating students, it's about graduating students that are future ready, that they are prepared to make the decision if they want to go to college, that they are prepared for the global workplace. They understand how to work with peers. They can collaborate with one another. They have those skills to actually be a productive worker in our global workplace. And it's also about being prepared for personal success, having the skills to understand how to enjoy life, enjoy their peers, have positive relationships. That's the vision that we have for every student in Lake Washington. We set some guiding principles for this work of planning for the 2021 school year early on in this work. And we had guiding principles around protecting the health and well-being of students, staff, and families, educating each student, ensuring that active, consistent, and meaningful connections happened with every student, that we proactively were addressing inequities that occurred in our system but have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and we have a principle to engage with our families. I hope tonight you're experiencing that guiding principle number 5, because we feel it is tremendously important that our families understand the decisions that we are making, particularly given the impact of this decision. We have some goals that all of our planning and work relate to. It's about mitigating and minimizing the spread of the coronavirus in accordance with our health agency guidance. It's about keeping staff and students safe while also supporting the social emotional well-being and interactions of our students. It's about prioritizing inclusive access to learning for each student, about supporting our families, and enabling staff and students to return to learning in ways that are significantly better than during our closure during the 2019-2020 school year. And on that last goal, Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden later in this presentation will provide an update as to how learning will look different in a remote setting this year than it did last year. We've done a tremendous amount of work. We have training planned for our staff. We've worked with around the working conditions for staff, and Mike will talk about that a little later in the presentation. And today was really about shifting directions. As you know, as a parent that was thinking about the decision that we asked you to consider of, do I want my child participating in a hybrid model, or do I want my child participating in a fully remote learning model? And that was a difficult decision that we asked you to make. We know that not all of the data and information that really was required to be able to make that decision was available at the time we asked. And we know the timeline for planning was critical, that we had that information as we went through August. And so I appreciate all of you that have asked questions, that have sought additional information, that have helped us to understand how that decision was uniquely challenging given your students' school experience or school setting. So I can't thank you enough for that. And today was about shifting directions. We now have a single focus of remote learning for every student to start the school year. And it is our absolute obligation to make sure that we achieve excellence in education with that remote experience. And so today was about a decision point. And so Lake Washington School District will start the 2021 school year in a fully remote model. That's the decision that was made today, communicated to both staff and families, so that you can start making your plans for that. We know the impact of this decision lands squarely with our families. Some families are able to support this in different ways. Other families may need support to be able to allow their children to fully access their education to start this school year. I want to talk about actually 7 different kind of unique data points or places where we received guidance. First is from Governor Inslee. Second is from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Superintendent Reichdahl and his team, the Department of Health. We have a group out of Bellevue called the Infectious Disease Modeling Group. They provided a report around reopening schools just a week ago that really helped us think about some of the things that are occurring within schools, but also the current infectious disease that we're seeing spread through our communities. Also, the King County COVID data dashboard. I want to provide some context around how we're reviewing that and which are the data points that we're actually keying in on as we think about this process moving forward. I also had a great discussion with our King County Health Department earlier this week that I will share some key points from. And we also have King County Department of Health. They actually released a public statement around their support for school districts, and I'll share some of that with you as well. And so many of you are going to be very familiar with this phased approach that Governor Inslee has released as counties are working through the different phases. You may have seen today that Governor Inslee dialed a few conditions back for many of the counties across Washington state. And that is really because of the current spread of the virus. And we are seeing an increase across many counties in Washington state. You will see that I have a reference point for all of my data or guidance within this slide deck. We will provide this for you should you wish to reference any of these data or guidance documents at a later date. But we as a district have to pay attention to the phase that our county is in. We are currently in phase 2. Some of those conditions were just dialed back. We know we're an essential service, and we know that schools will have a community impact. And so we have to be cognizant of that and thoughtful of that as we think about bringing students back for in-person learning. It's also important to point out that we have not received any communication on whether the governor will take action related to K-12 schools as he did in the spring. As you remember, there were a number of school districts that started to determine that they needed to close down due to the spread of the coronavirus in their school districts. And at a certain point, Governor Inslee shut all schools down for a period of time and then ultimately for the rest of the school year. We have no indication that the governor is going to take any action in that regard, but he might. We don't know that right now. We also have received guidance from OSPI as well as an FAQ around the guidance from the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And these are 40, 50, 60-page documents, so it almost seems limiting that I am pulling out one simple statement. But I wanted to point out to you that they do reference that school districts are going to have to make a decision about being able to open or not. And it's either a local decision or a local health authority decision or a governor's mandate. And today, I just need to be transparent that this was a local decision that we made based on our review of data and understanding of the current situation and projections to come with the virus. I also need to let you know that OSPI has stated that they do not intend to update their guidance. And so we are operating under the current guidance and assuming that we are not going to receive additional guidance from OSPI prior to the beginning of the 2021 school year. And so I think it's important for you as a community to know that as you go and reference this guidance, that this is the guidance that we have to work from. And you'll see that there are some levels of specificity, but there really isn't the specificity needed to actually evaluate and use metrics to make these decisions. And so locally, we've really had to process that information, run some ideas off King County Public Health to make sure that we were reviewing the data accurately as we made this decision. So what would cause us not to be able to open up? There's a number of things, but there's a couple of pieces that I want to point out. Primary in this decision is increased cases of the virus with transmission rate over 1. That's really a key metric that you'll hear me point to a number of times during this presentation. Transmission rate is the idea that any individual that is infected, how many times do they hand off the virus to another person? And anytime you have a transmission rate below 1, it actually allows for the virus to, if you will, die out to a certain degree. And when it is over 1, it actually accelerates the growth. What I know is about 2 weeks ago in King County, we were at a transmission rate of about 1.3. Just today, we're at a transmission rate of 1.7 or 1.8, a significant increase during that time. The other piece I want to talk about is our ability to adequately staff our schools and buildings. And I have a few comments about that in a couple of slides. And one of the questions you may ask is, why are increased cases an issue if there are not many severe cases or deaths? I think one thing to point out is any time a virus such as this is able to spread through our communities, it's not beneficial or positive for any of us. We know early on in this virus that it affected the elderly, but we also know that the virus travels through the age groups differently. We also know that the virus travels through our county. If you go to the Department of Health or the King County website, you can actually see over time how the virus has walked through King County. And right now, we are seeing an increase here in our region, just like many other regions in King County. But I want to point out one specific piece. The CDC has given us guidance that when a school has a confirmed case in a building, that really we need to shut that building down, and you can see here, for up to 5 days. And currently, given that 1.7 or 1.8 transmission rate that we have here in King County, what that would cause is students would return to school, the virus would start to spread, transmission would start to occur, we would start having cases in our school, and we would have to rather rapidly shut things back down and go into a remote setting. And so rather than start in that mode, knowing that really we would have to move to a remote model and implement this kind of process, we are starting in that fully remote for all students. Another question might be, why can't you staff your schools? You have enough staff. I think yes, and we have to be cognizant of our staff that are in high-risk categories per CDC guidelines. As you know, the federal government has put some contingencies in place for individuals with high risk, some additional leave options and things like that. And so we know that there are a number, if not many, of our staff that are in a high risk category that potentially wouldn't allow us to have opened school in September. That's evaluations that we are currently doing and understanding. And we also know that there's also an impact with our staff. Our staff that have students in school, they also may be challenged by the implementation of different models in different districts while we are implementing our full remote model. There's also the concern with the increased spread of COVID due to the challenges with physical distancing. Some of the guidance that we received from the Department of Health, from the CDC, really describe what a classroom setting should look like. And when you think about a school, when you think about the experience of a school, students interacting with one another, just arriving to school, students can't maintain physical distance to a great degree. And so we know that while we would do our absolute best, maintaining that physical distancing would have been a challenge, which then would have increased the spread of the virus, which would have caused more staff to be out. So those are just some considerations that we made as we were thinking about this specific aspect of returning to school here in September. I want to talk a little bit about the Department of Health guidance. I just went through and just what are the things that they even were providing guidance on. Physical distancing, drop-off and pickup of students, identifying modified start and end times for different groups of students within the school. How do you health screen to make sure that students and staff aren't arriving with a fever, that they haven't had any identified concerns over the last 24 hours? How do you group students to make sure that you're cohorting students appropriately? How do you provide meal services, hygiene practices, face coverings for students and staff required is the guidance that we have received to date. How do you do bus transportation? How do you respond to an active case? And then how do you clean and disinfect your schools? All of that is critically important, and currently the Department of Health has not provided guidance or metrics to support the evaluation for reopening schools. And I say that because as a school district filled with educators and leaders wanting to do the best for our students, our staff, our families, and our community, it's critically important that we actually have benchmarks that we think about how and when will we reopen our schools. And so I'll share with you some of those metrics that we've identified later. But currently, the Department of Health does not have a standard set of metrics that all districts in Washington State are using. I referenced a report that came out of the infectious disease modeling group, I believe out of Bellevue, And they were tasked by the Department of Health to actually model return to school, particularly in King County. And so that report was extremely helpful as an organization to understand if we were to reopen schools, what were some of the considerations that we would need to make? I pulled out just a couple of statements that I want to share with you, and I provided the link here because I think it would be a good review for everyone, because one of the primary drivers of being able to reopen school is really a community-wide effort to make sure that we all are in this and making sure that we are practicing appropriate physical distancing, masking when we are out in public, not participating in gatherings, because that is how we mitigate and reduce the transmission of the virus. And it is extremely challenging. I know that as a parent, I know that as a community member here in Redmond, that these are extremely difficult things that we're trying to deal with right now. And I know that this is how we are going to get our children back to in-person instruction, is to change that projection so that our transmission rate falls below 1. In the report, it states that community-wide mitigation efforts must improve significantly prior to school reopening, and that they estimate that if the effective reproductive number is below 1 by the end of August, that we may have the capacity to reopen schools. And really what they're saying is that once that reproductive or transmission falls below 1, that the mitigating measures and countermeasures that we would put in place would actually maintain a level below 1. And so that is going to be a key indicator for all of us to pay attention to as a community as we think about students phasing back into our schools for in-person instruction. And then in their conclusions, they made this statement that recent case data collected since the report was drafted. So this report was actually drafted just before the spike that we're currently seeing. And so that's even more telling about the data. But it says recent case data collected since this report was drafted shows exponential growth in COVID-19 burden and indicate that levels of disease activity following the move to phase 2 are too high to support reopening. And so for me, I appreciate that level of specificity because it helps me evaluate what is the best decision for us in Lake Washington School District, knowing that the decision that we make was critically important and impactful to our entire community. I want to talk a little bit about the King County COVID data dashboard. It is something that I reference with my team and I reference individually quite often because it helps me to understand the current state of things here in King County. While our Washington state numbers are good because we're all community members of Washington, it really is about our King County effect that is important for us to know. And so I pulled out a specific piece here, and this is that reproductive or transmission number that I was talking about. I said it was either 1.7 or 1 point. You can see here it's 1.7 currently, but 2 weeks ago this number was 1.3. You can see the estimated range there is between 1.4 and 1.9. That's because these are statistics and data. And so that's the range that they would give the accuracy of that, with 1.7 being their best guess. You can see over to the right that is how the reproductive number has moved over a period of time. And you can see currently we're significantly above that 1.0 number, which is the red line. I also want to show you, these are all of the data that are on what they call their key indicators of COVID-19. I would want all of you to understand where this is, because I think this is an important data set for all of us to understand, and it helps give us key indicators for how are we doing as a county. You can see here that there are a few places that we are seeing some positive outcomes right now. And it really is around hospitalization and healthcare readiness. So should we see the spike that is being predicted right now, we should have the systems in place to be able to respond to that. That is great because that also helps reduce the death rate, because we know this is a virus that has killed far too many people and people in our own communities. We know that the first death in the United States was right here in our school district. And so it really does hit home when we think about the impact that this virus has had, and particularly on the elderly. And so I think the other piece here is you can see that there's a number of areas that are reported as not meeting current targets. That's number of cases being reported, that's the reproductive number, that's the risk of death, but that number has just had a slight uptick from 1.0 to 1.1. So it really is flat and or decreasing, or excuse me, it's increasing just slightly, and they want to see that as flat or decreasing. And of significant concern to me is, are we testing enough, and are we testing rapidly enough? And so that is, are we providing the right number of tests to actually detect the number of cases needed, but also are we turning those tests around in a timely manner so that individuals that are infected with the virus can actually take appropriate precautions, and those that aren't can return to normal life in an expedient manner. Why is that important to us as a district? When you think about the idea of rapid testing with a minimum of 24 or a maximum of 24-hour turnaround for notification of a positive or a negative test, that would allow us, should we have in-person instruction, to know, do we need to shut a school down for a longer period of time given the test result of that individual? And so that's why that is critically important to us. And currently, as you can see, neither of the metrics around testing or turnaround time are in a place for that. I want to share a couple of points around my discussion that I had with King County Health earlier this week. I met with the director of King County Health. She was wonderful to speak with. She spent about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes with me, answering absolutely every question I had, walking through how I was analyzing the data, providing feedback around that, providing some level of considerations that we as a school district, Lake Washington School District, should be making as we made this decision. She indicated that the infectious disease modeling group that provided that earlier report is actually reporting that Washington is truly on a negative trajectory, similar to other states in our country that are seeing significant national media coverage. That isn't something that we want as a state. That isn't something we want as a county. And we definitely, that is not something we want to see in our school district. We know that once we return to school, that there is the potential to increase the transmission of the virus, and that's why it is so critically important for that one metric to start to dip below 1, so that we aren't being the rapid increase in the spread of the virus. She also expressed concerns that if we were to open schools right now, given the current transmission rates and modeling, that the virus would spread too rapidly to contain, which would just cause us to immediately close schools down. And I talked a little bit about that. That is not a good plan and not a good experience for students to start here, have to move to a different model in very short amount of time. One thing I truly appreciated about that conversation was King County Public Health will continue to provide information. They will help us evaluate as we think about how are we going to provide in-person instruction right now for a few specific groups, because we know there are some students that they just can't learn in our remote learning model. And so we will have some level of in-person instruction, maybe to a small degree, but we will have in-person instruction. We'll be able to learn from that as we think about mitigating measures in the schools, and it will help us as we plan for our phased reopening and those ideas. The last thing I want to share with you around some of the data that helped provide support for us yesterday, the King County Department of Health, in response to other districts that made the determination to close, many of those in South King County, one of them our neighboring district in the Bellevue School District. So I want to just point out a few things that they talked about in their public statement. They actually said that we do support school districts in their decisions to actually start the year with online learning. And that support means a tremendous amount to us because our focus is typically in the space of making sure there are health requirements in place while we partner with public health, but we truly are about teaching and learning and connecting with students, and thinking about a global pandemic isn't something that we have done before. So it means a lot to us that the public health department is starting to partner with us as we think about our closures and then also our reopening. They also said in that report that the COVID-19 transmission within King County is of serious concern. And that is their words. They see the current transmission that's occurring as serious, but they also are concerned that there is going to be a rise in the transmissions because of who has the virus right now and which age groups actually have the virus. And their fear is that they're going to start seeing increased cases in older age groups. I think lastly, to share regarding public health, they actually recognize that reopening school September 1 would be extremely challenging for many districts, and if not all districts in King County. Again, you can see I referenced where that came from if you want to read their full statement. Oh, excuse me, one more point from the public health statement, that they also recognize that while we are not at the end of August, which is really the one of the benchmarks we need to think about, we really needed to make decisions now so that we can be ready to offer the absolutely most effective learning model to support students, families, and staff in the fall. So if I were you, probably the first question I would be asking is, when will students return to school for in-person instruction? And back to what I said in the opening, our goal is absolutely to have students in person with their teachers, because that is truly where the absolute best teaching and learning occurs. That's where personal connections are made. That's where we can support students in their social emotional learning and other needs that they have. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we will process this decision going forward. And so for me, I just call this our review and communication protocol, because as families, you deserve to know what we're thinking about and what metrics we'll be using as we walk through this. And so specifically, you can expect to hear from us shortly after October 1, November 1, December 1, and January 1, to be specific about how we are evaluating the situation, and are we at a place where we can start phasing students back into in-person instruction. And so that first step is really a data check, understanding and reviewing identified metrics that I will share with you in a minute related to the virus in our country, our county and our communities. Step 2 is analysis, truly analyzing those key data points with our key experts and stakeholders to determine validity of analysis. And I say it that way because we will do our analysis and we will make sure that our public health partners are supporting us in that analysis to make sure that we are accurately reporting the data and accurately taking action when action is needed. The third step is communication. After we do that analysis, we owe you an explanation of that analysis so you know exactly what we are thinking, because any changes we make, we know are going to have impacts on families and learning and situations and plans that you have already set up. So we want to make sure that you are apprised of the situation all along. We will never on a Friday say, hey, on Monday, here's a change. We will always give families a runway to be able to make plans and as changes happen throughout the school year. And then step 4 is really that, are we status quo or is it time to take action? And that is really dependent on the analysis and what we're going to do. When you think about students returning back to school for in-person instruction and experiences, we want to be thoughtful about that. We may have to do some hybrid approaches as we think about students returning to school with their teachers. And when we get to that point, we will put out information about how that will occur. If there are options for families that they can make, we will provide those. Seek your feedback as we are moving forward to make sure that our students and teachers are able to connect with one another. And that next question is, well, what are the metrics that we will use to evaluate? And I pulled some metrics that really helped us in this evaluation. As we work with our public health partners, I want to make sure that we are actually using the right metrics. And so those are questions I'll be asking them through August to make sure that as we enter into September, we already know exactly what we should be looking for as we reach that first benchmark of October 1. And so the current identified metrics that I want to share with you is number one is just that general overview of the King County dashboard that I shared with you. They have key indicators that will help us understand the current state of things within our county. No surprise, transmission rate or reproduction rate, identifying that below 1.0 will be a key indicator for us that it is potentially time to take action. We also know that there needs to be rapid testing and quality contact tracing by the King County Department of Health for us to be able to return. Like I described a few minutes ago, if we don't have rapid testing and King County isn't able to do that high quality rapid contact tracing, then it will just put us into a cycle where we are having to close schools, open schools, close schools again, which is definitely not best for students in their learning, and it puts a high level of pressure and stress on our staff who want to do right by their students. We also want to think about the learning data as we go through this process as well. Daily attendance is one of those requirements for our remote learning directed by OSPI. We do monitor student online activity to make sure that we identify any students that maybe aren't participating at the level that they should be. And we want to look at any benchmark assessment data because students learning their academic information is critically important through this process as well. There's many considerations that we need to make as a school district, and there's two more that I want to talk about tonight. First and foremost is childcare. I understand completely that the impact of this decision means that you as a parent are being placed in a situation where you will need to support your child through their educational experience. While we have a significantly improved remote learning experience that Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden will speak to, we also know that parents are going to play a critical role in this. And we know that we have families that they are required to be in person at their job just to make ends meet with their family. And so we want to be considerate of that. We have an aspirational target that every elementary and every middle school will be able to provide an adequate space as we work with our community partners around providing childcare. But it isn't just childcare such as babysitting, it's childcare with an intended purpose, and that is to make sure that those students are able to participate with their teacher and classmates in their remote learning. Because since we will be having live instruction and schedules that Mike will talk about in a minute, we don't have an asynchronous program that students really can do at any time of day. So it's critically important that they are able to participate with their peers during instruction. And so this isn't childcare just to take care of children. It is that, but it is also to keep them engaged and learning with their classmates. That's really important for all of our students and our students that may need childcare. We just want to be tremendously considerate of our families as we walk through this. The next The next piece is that remote learning model. We have been thinking about this for a number of months now. We had many lessons learned from the remote learning experience in the spring, and we have improved on that substantially. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden. I believe Shannon, our Director of Communications, will be able to do that for us. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Thanks, Dr. Holmen. So tonight, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, I'll be providing some updates on what you can expect for remote learning as we return to school. And these updates are based on questions that we've been receiving. But I also want you to know we'll be updating Q&A based on questions that we solicit from you after tonight, from you as well as the rest of our community. And I also want to commit to the work that we'll do to get those updated as soon as we have information. I know some families have been waiting to get questions answered, and we are really going to commit to being responsive on those. Before I start tonight too, I also want to acknowledge how hard this whole situation is on families. You know, it's one thing to hear about planning and schedules and options, but it's quite another when decisions actually get communicated. And this really hit home for our family tonight. We just found out that our youngest daughter will be fully online for her first year of college. We were expecting there might be a kind of a hybrid approach as well. We found out tonight she needs to be home. She won't be in a dorm. And this is something we've been talking about for years, and there were lots of battles over 4 years to get her through high school and get her ready for college. This is a developmentally important time for her to become an independent young woman, and that's all on hold for us. And I can't even imagine how much harder it would have been back in kindergarten when she was just starting her educational career, or if our family was trying to figure out how to support her and keep our jobs, or if she had a disability. All the decisions that we're making, we recognize are real and impactful and have consequences. At the same time, I take heart in knowing that we have amazing educators and community members who are working hard to find solutions to this really enormous task in front of us. So before I go into the updates tonight, I also want to provide you with some context for the level of detail that we can provide at this time, and just in terms of the timing that it takes to get some of the information out. First of all, there are literally hundreds of people working on planning efforts right now, and sometimes we hear the acknowledgement that those folks are working really hard, and they are. They're working around the clock to get decisions and plans made to reopen school in a remote setting. But I also want to acknowledge they're working smart. They're looking for creative solutions to bring students back to school in a remote option. We're also partnering with our different labor associations, and I need to say they are amazing partners. They're keeping kids at the center. They're making sure that the people who serve our kids and our students and our families can do their jobs safely and effectively. And as I've been reading through what really is making or breaking district plans right now around our country, it's those partnerships. And so we can't say enough about the amazing partnerships we have with our unions and labor groups, including the Lake Washington Education Association, to name one. We're also dependent on guidance and direction, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, from external agencies. So we're working closely with Department of Health, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, State Board of Education, and decisions we make, we hold up to guidance and direction we receive from those different agencies. And so there's a time commitment there. And then finally, I need to be really clear that there are also dependencies among the hundreds of decisions that we need to make to reopen school. And so, for example, one of those is, as I mentioned earlier, we're working with our bargaining groups and our Lake Washington Education Association around the daily live instructional time that occurs and examples of schedules that we can have. We also have planning teams that are developing schedules by content area and grade level. So as those teams begin to make decisions, we can start marrying those different concepts and those different plans together. And then we can take those plans and provide them to our schools, and then they can plan further. So oftentimes the gap between when we actually are planning and when you start to hear about information is really a result of those dependencies and needing to go through those to get to decisions. So as I mentioned, we are working on some schedules, and there have been some questions we've received about what you might expect for a daily schedule at the elementary or secondary level. So at the elementary level, for example, as Dr. Holmen mentioned, we are, and even at the secondary level, are talking about what does daily live instruction look like, and we are expecting daily live instruction and instruction over the week. So at the elementary level, that might look like an opening introduction for kids as they come into a video conference session. We are hearing very clearly the importance of social emotional learning and that importance of building relationships. And so students would come into a room like we are here right now with their teacher and have some connection, time to talk about what the goals are for the day, and then might transition into a lesson, for example, around literacy. We also know, though, as we've been reading research and working with our different groups and our educators, that instruction in a classroom is so much different online. We don't want our kids sitting in front of a screen for an hour listening to a teacher talk at them. And so we're looking at much more condensed, focused time with live instruction and then time for students to work independently. And so then that might be a literacy lesson from a teacher at the beginning of class, time for some students to work independently, perhaps do some reading, answer some questions, and maybe the teacher's working with smaller groups of students. In addition, throughout the day, we will have, like we have in a traditional elementary schedule, specialists who come in. So there might be a music teacher that comes in a point of the day and does a half-hour music lesson, or a PE specialist who comes in and helps the students through a PE lesson. We also have program services that occur. And so over the course of a day, students will be getting lessons from their general education teacher, from program teachers, having some work that's independent, having some work that's live. So that'll be very much different than what it was in the spring, where there might have been a series of lessons mapped out over the week. There will be schedules for every grade level that will be developed and mapped out by our schools and then shared with you as soon as they're available. So again, speaking of those dependencies, we're thinking that that's probably mid to late August when you start hearing what does the daily schedule look like for your individual child. In addition, at the secondary level, we are planning on having courses just like we've had before. So your children will have time with their teachers in each of the courses. They'll be in a period structure. So like we've had before, we will likely have 6 and 7 periods at the middle and high school level. What we're looking at, though, to minimize the number of different subjects they have in any one day is potentially schools might look at a block schedule where they have half the periods on one day and the other half on the other day, and then they alternate through that so that students only are interacting with maybe 3 classes in a day just to kind of manage that workflow. And so that might mean that their first period science class, instead of being a 45-minute class, might be a 90-minute class, and there'll be some live instruction and some independent instruction, but it will be a scheduled time. We're also looking at things like start times and how long the periods are, and so we'll have more information on that. But I think the key takeaway here is there will be periods of the day that are allocated for instructional blocks and teachers assigned to them. In addition, you'll probably have some questions about the content and what's covered. As you know, when we're live and in person, we can cover a lot more than we can when we're remote. So we have our teams that are working on identifying the most essential content for kids. And that's content that's essential to understand the next concept in a sequence, or understand the next grade levels of content, or content that cuts across disciplines. So an example of that at the elementary level is literacy. We know that's just such a foundational skill. And so we identify what are the most essential literacy skills that kids need to be successful in all their courses. We're also looking at identifying and providing materials, both digital and print, to make the curriculum much more accessible. And so one of the things we heard from families last year is some of the digital resources were harder to access. And so we're looking at how do we narrow that down so when students are working independently, there's more focused, easily accessible digital content. And then also looking at purchasing print materials for our core content areas, particularly at the elementary level, math and English language arts or literacy, so that every family would have a set of materials at home that teachers can refer to, and that we're not having to send packets to some families or print packets in smaller groups. In addition, at the secondary level, we're providing planning guides and times for teachers to plan and collaborate. And so at the beginning of the year, what you can expect at the secondary level in particular is very clear descriptions of what students will learn over the course of the year, what will be expected, and what the critical content will be. In addition, we've had some questions about grading, and as you know, last spring we had a very unusual grading system. As Dr. Holmen mentioned early on, that was direction that we received, or a result of direction we received from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. We know that direction expired at the end of this school year, and our sense right now is that we will be looking at a more traditional grading system where kids are actually having to earn letter grades and having to hit certain benchmarks to pass. So we'll have much more detail on that, but it will most likely not be an A and an incomplete at the secondary level, or all just completion types of things at the elementary. So know that there's more detail coming on that, but I just want to assure people that it'll probably look more like it looked before we had our closure in the spring. Another area we're hearing a lot of questions about is our learning management system. That's the digital platform that students use to interact with their class and their teachers. As you have heard, probably we are using Classroom Teams from Microsoft. This is a really high quality learning management system that we were planning on using anyway. There have been a number of questions about, well, why are you switching away from PowerSchool Learning? That's something we're familiar with and we really loved. Well, one thing that was really critical in our decision there was that PowerSchool Learning is a program that's not going to be supported in the future. It's one of those programs that was purchased by another company. There wasn't a guarantee that they would actually be able to provide technical support. That's a pretty significant issue, and so we decided that probably not good to invest in something that may not be supported or available in the next few years, particularly given the state we're in. Also, Microsoft Teams is just doing some amazing things, and so people have been asking, well, what about all of the features that are in a management system? We haven't seen that in Teams yet. Well, we want to assure you the version that we'll be using has things like grading systems, ways to provide content to students, ways to track assignments, as well as a really rich video conferencing feature. And so we will be working on providing really specific instruction and training for our teachers to be able to use that really effectively, and have more information for you in the coming weeks about that. We're also working through some of the details about what we can use Teams for in terms of recording lessons and having video features in it as well. And again, that's one of the things we're working through bargaining and developing guidance around. Again, speaking of those dependencies, as an example, one of the questions we've seen is, well, why don't you just record the lessons and post those? It seems like a really easy solution, right? Well, if you think about just that, and map that out over 1,800 teachers, and at the secondary level, teachers that teach up to 7 or 5 to 6 content areas, that's a lot of videos to store and manage and distribute and make sure are really high quality. And so creating the system to do that, there's also privacy concerns we need to work through. So lots of decisions around just how do you make videos available to students, but those are things we are working on. We're also working on the idea of having pre-recorded videos for certain content areas, particularly at the elementary level, for example, like science lessons that all of our teachers could use and access. So for example, if they wanted to have a science lesson on water currents or air, they could go to a video and that would be accessible to all students at all grade levels across the district. So lots more to come on the use of Teams and video, but just know something that's something we're actively pursuing. With that, as you can imagine then, as you know, we're very dependent on devices. And so we are working on making sure that all of our students have devices. That's included the purchase of new digital devices to put into our system so that we have more in our elementary in particular. We're also looking at connecting with families to see what their needs are around digital hotspots. So that's something we've committed significant resources to make sure that on that first day, students are prepared and have the digital resources they need. But as I mentioned, we're also working on identifying print resources that can be provided to families at the beginning of the year that students will have at home and be able to use and not be dependent on having to come in every few weeks to pick up a new set of packets. So lots of resources coming our way. Again, more details coming there, but know that those are all things we're planning for. And as soon as we have more details about those, for example, how are we going to distribute them? Where can you pick them up? What are the expectations for their use? We'll be sharing those with you. Most of that information will likely be coming directly from your schools. So last few things I want to talk about. I know one of the areas that folks are very interested in right now are our program services. So services like special education, our English language services, our safety net, highly capable, et cetera. I want to start with special education. As Dr. Holmen mentioned, we are committed to providing in-person services, particularly for students with some of our most significant disabilities. We are thinking about how do we do that in a way that allows us to maintain safety and social distancing and meet the needs of our students. And so again, that's something we're working on negotiating right now, and we're committed to having more information on that right around August 10th. Also, Dr. Hitch, our Director of Special Services, will be sending out communication directly to families of students with disabilities in the next few days. In addition, for our students that don't have a significant disabilities who maybe aren't in self-contained programs or in our general education population, our special education teachers will be providing real lifetime support remotely. And so as you can think about the course of an instructional day, a general education teacher may be providing some live instruction remotely, and then a special education teacher will also be providing live instruction remotely, so that that time that our students are with teachers in person, I shouldn't say in person, remote and live, will be higher for our students with disabilities. So just know we're really committed to making sure that our students are getting their needs met. And we're also being very careful to think about how do we ensure safety. And so even when we're in person, our goal is to make sure that we're keeping groups of folks together and not having, for example, some folks that are having to go and work with multiple groups of students in person. So that's really the idea around remote instruction is when a specialist or a special education teacher maybe has to work with groups of students from multiple schools, they can push those services in remotely. So much more work around special education coming. We also are thinking about how our teachers are going to be reaching out to families to share this information and work with individual education programs to meet the needs of our students where they are. In addition, some of our programs like English Learner Services, Safety Net Services, Highly Capable Services, we have program teachers there that serve multiple students in many programs. They will be pushing in those services remotely. And so there will be times of the day scheduled with groups of students to work with those program teachers and really to take advantage of their expertise and their skill. So again, a teacher or a student may be working with their general education teacher to get a literacy lesson, and then maybe an English language teacher comes in at the end of that lesson and works on some skills that a student might need to be more successful. Or our highly capable teachers will be working with groups of students to provide really wonderful and rich curriculum. And so again, we're working on developing what those requirements are for those teachers, and then we'll be mapping those into daily schedules for our students and programs. Last couple things just in terms of programming. So there have been some questions about our WANIC program, and we're anticipating having a rich WANIC offering, and that will be also run remotely. So again, that will line up just like it does now with the schedules of students so they can take advantage of WANIC programs. And AP is another area where we're working closely with College Board to take advantage of the rich resources they have that can be delivered remotely. The last couple areas, we've had some questions about music and PE. We're working with our music and PE teachers to talk about how do we deliver these programs that are actually typically done in groups with performance in a remote setting. And so we'll have more information on that, but we do anticipate, particularly at the elementary level, they'll be pushing music and PE remotely. That might be with larger groups of students. And then at the secondary level, we're talking about how do you create really rich and meaningful experiences when you can't have students together. The last area to talk about tonight is just the question I would have if I were sitting home is, well, how are we getting our teachers ready to do a better job as we move into this more remote session? We have in August right now over 20 hours of training planned for our teachers, and we're working with actually international experts to help with us with that. One of those is Dr. Jon Holmen. He is a renowned international expert on effective ways to deliver instruction and has been turning his attention to how do you deliver that with a distance. He's actually going to be working directly with our administrators and teachers, and will be using resources from some of his recent work around distance education and providing really specific training for our teachers on how to do distance education very well. We're also working with a group called the TIE Center out of the University of Minnesota, I believe, and the University of Washington as well, around inclusive practices. And we will have coaches in our districts that will help our schools and our teachers to think about how do we create inclusive learning opportunities for our students with disabilities. So quite a bit of support will be provided right at the beginning of the year and throughout the year to make sure we're continuing to support our students and families. As I mentioned, lots more questions I know, and one of the things we'll be doing later is asking you to send us your questions, and then we will be working just furiously to make sure we get those questions answered and posted on our website. So I know there are lots of them that we probably didn't get to, or probably questions you have just based on what I shared tonight, and you want much more detail, and I just want to assure you that we'll be working to answer those. So as I wrap up, I just want to say, I've worked with many educators over my career in education in multiple states, and I can say that the people in Lake Washington are working with integrity and skill and keeping our students and families at the center of our work. And I have a great degree of confidence just based on my experience around the country. And I want to assure you that we're doing the very best work to make sure that your kids come back to a wonderful experience, and that we're also prepared for when we can be back in person. So as I said, looking forward to your questions and looking forward to making sure that your kids come back to a great experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That's tremendously helpful. With that, we're going to bring this event to a close. I want to thank each and every one of you for spending the last hour with us as we provided some information about this immensely critical decision. Thank you for partnering with us over this next 6 weeks as we prepare for the opening of school. Even though it will be in a remote setting, the first day of school is always a tremendous event, and we intend to make this year as special as any year for your children. There will be a K-12 Insight survey sent out. We're going to use that survey tool to seek questions from you. In that, we will be able to categorize questions. We're going to ask for your email address in that if you want a direct response back. Some of those will be directly responded to. Others are going to be of such high quality that we do need to put those in our frequently asked questions, because it's really a question that the whole community should have a response to. So take some time, provide us with your questions. We will be actively working on this over the next 6 weeks to get information to you around what remote learning will look like and what fall 2021 will look like. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we wish you the best. Stay healthy. Thank you.